The title of this talk is The Big Short, or Building Your Own Doomsday Machine with Graphs. And I want to be upfront here. If you're looking for ultra technical discussion about graph databases versus relational stores and financial markets, this is not that talk. However, if you're looking for a talk that will make you sound significantly smarter and cooler at dinner parties, and maybe understand financial markets a little better and how those structures are actually graphs, you've absolutely found it, and hopefully you'll have a lot of fun over the next 20 minutes or so. The inspiration for this talk was the movie The Big Short, as well as of course the book. And so if you haven't seen the film or you're not familiar with the book, it's actually really the story of this guy. Well, not actually this guy. This is Christian Bale, but the guy Christian Bale plays in the movie is named Michael Burry. And Michael Burry predicted the subprime mortgage collapse and the subsequent recession in 2008, 2009. And while I'm not going to talk extensively about Mr. Burry, because I'm not a believer in spoilers, but if you have seen the movie, this talk will hopefully really, really clear up a lot of the confusion around what the actual underlying structure of those assets was. Or if you have not, this talk will be an excellent primer for it. So I think to really have any discussion about the subprime mortgage crisis, we really need to first understand, what was the Great Recession? And so the Great Recession was the period of time between Q3 2008 and Q2 2009, where we experienced significant contraction within the market. Which leads to, I guess, to the more basic question, which is what is a recession in general? So a recession in general is actually the contraction period of a normal business cycle, wherein you have the boom and then a contraction, and together those form what we call just a basic business cycle, and it kind of looks a little bit like this. It is this rise and it is this fall. And so by economic definition, a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. But I think for those of us who are not econ PhDs, it's more easily understood in kind of the emotional temperature during these times. And so obviously during boom times, everything is awesome. We're happy, we feel like our wages are going a long way. We've this typically very positive outlook. And typically they say that near the top of a business cycle, there's a feeling of euphoria, and being the myopic people we are, we think things are going to be awesome forever. Though things are not awesome forever. We see this minor setback in the market. We think, what? I'm a value investor. I've made good investments. Things are going to be okay. It'll bounce back tomorrow. It's fine. And then as that quarter drags on and that quarter becomes the next, we start to really feel the wheels come off, and we realize we've made maybe some terrible choices. Maybe I didn't need that third condo. And we really start to feel the things around us coming apart. And then near the bottom of the business cycle, the bottom of a recession, there is a feeling of dejection or depression there, wherein the idea of good times ever coming back and times of low unemployment, these ideas are non-existent to us. But being the short-memoried humans that we are, as soon as things start going back up, we've forgotten what recession, and we're back into the everything is awesome mode. So now that we have kind of a basic primer on what is a recession, what was the Great Recession, let's talk a little bit about graphs. Now that you're so warm and fuzzy about econ, let's bring in math, right? Everybody's favorite things. So graph theory is rooted in a methodology used by Leonhard Euler to solve what was called the Seven-Bridget-Koenigsberg problem. Leonhard Euler was a mathematician and logistician, and he wanted to be able to answer exactly this fundamental question of, is it possible to tour the city crossing each bridge exactly once? And you may have some intuition and say, well, it doesn't seem possible. But being a mathematician, approximate answers are never good enough. And to answer that discretely, Euler generated, a theory and a methodology which we have then called graph theory, wherein he approximated the land masses as vertices, and the bridges between the vertices or the bridges between the land masses as edges. And so the important thing to come out of that solution set was exactly this mathematical concept of the study of points and arcs, or as it came to be known as nodes or vertices and edges, or in the database world nodes and relationships. And I think that the real key takeaway here is that there's a discrete mathematical architecture beneath graph databases as a data structure, as well as graph algorithms as a method for understanding how these vertices and nodes interrelate. And I know I can hear the eye rolls from here, like this is very interesting. There's a very small subsection of the population that is genuinely riveted by graph theory. So I figure I will try and bring it home to you, and I think this is the most appropriate time to kick off a discussion of the subprime mortgage crisis. Because fundamentally, the network of transactions there is a graph. So I will start by telling a story. A story that many people went through in the years leading up to 2008, and that many people go through today. So let's say we're going to call you borrower, and I found a picture of this borrower covering her head. She knows bad things are coming, but we'll kind of see how it goes. And this borrower or this person finds a property. It is a fantastic property: 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a big backyard for the dog, a garage for your Porsche project. It's an awesome house. But like most of us, you don't have enough money just to buy this house. So you approach the bank. You say, hey, I've got this great job. I've paid all of my bills on time. Will you lend me some money so I can buy this cool house? And the bank says, sure, absolutely. And what they say is, we'll give you the money provided you sign this agreement. And that agreement is called a mortgage. And so what happens is the bank will lend you money to purchase the house. And what they'll say is that, if you make all your payments on time, you will own the house free and clear. But if you don't make all of your payments on time, we're going to, essentially take that property and sell it such that we can get our money back. This works out well for you. You're able to, purchase a house well above, the cash you have on hand, and the bank, makes away well because they charge you interest on this loan. And so, you purchase the property. The bank will hold the mortgage note. The borrower will owe the mortgage, and that mortgage will then be secured by this property. And so this story gets repeated again and again and again for a bank, such that they will hold tens, hundreds, thousands of these mortgage notes, all tied to different properties, all tied to different borrowers. And so this is a very normal story. This is a typical loan market. And so the bank thinks to itself, these interest payments are swell, but I'm out of money now, and I've lent out all the money I have. Is there a way that I could get more money to make more of these awesome loans, to make more interest, to make more moves in the financial world? And so the banking institution thought and thought and thought and thought, and it said, hey, I've got this great idea. We'll call it the collateralized debt obligation. And so what is a collateralized debt obligation? In the academic sense, it is a structured financial product that pulls together cash flow generating assets, i.e. mortgages, and repackages them into an asset pool, repackages this asset pool into discrete tranches, which can then be sold to investors. What does this actually mean, or what does this mean in practice? It means banks will take these mortgages that they hold, we'll take a subsection of 50, and we'll note this as a CDO. And so remember, the bank holds all of these notes which are tied to houses, which are tied to borrowers. And what they'll then do is separate these mortgages out into what we call tranches. And these tranches are organized based on their risk level, meaning how how creditworthy are the borrowers behind these mortgages. And so to raise money, they'll then issue bonds against these mortgages that are then collateralized by, no, they'll issue bonds against these tranches, which are collateralized by these mortgages. And depending on the underlying asset, these mortgages that we're talking about, they'll give those bonds a riskiness rating, where AAA being super secure, credit score of 800, loan to value is very, very low. It's very likely that you're going to get paid back on these. And what they'll do is they'll issue bonds against all these different tranches of varying underlying creditworthiness, and of course varying levels of risk. And so if you're unfamiliar with what the concept of a bond is, essentially it's wherein you as an investor loan the bank, company, institution money. In exchange, they say, hey, I'll give you your money back plus a little bit of interest. And essentially this allows the bank to A, raise capital to make more loans, and B, it also allows them to offload some of their risk onto investors rather than holding all of that risk themselves. And so this seems fairly reasonable. But in our infinite wisdom and quest for more and more interesting financial products, the idea came up that we could actually repackage these CDOs or these bonds tied to CDOs into other asset pools. And and if you've seen the film, it's this joking CDO squared. But what it is by grouping together several of these bonds and then issuing another investment tool here. There's also a bond that is collateralized by these original CDO bonds. You can then essentially pull down twice from that. And so this is where things got kind of interesting during the financial crisis. And so the further removed we get from the underlying asset, the more difficult it is to approximate the riskiness of that asset or that investment. And so what happened is often you'd have maybe a couple of AAA bonds and a big pile of A bonds. And so when you would rate the riskiness or creditworthiness of this third tool, it would often not necessarily be directly tied to these mortgages at the bottom of the pile. And so you'd often have something like the one highlighted in yellow here. It's got a couple of AAAs, a couple of A's being rated as something like a AAA. And so this process actually got most scary when dealing with the riskiest types of tranches and the riskiest types of bonds, wherein you'd have a lot of triple B's and B's with a couple of A's being rated as very, very low risk, even though the underlying assets were actually very, very risky. It was very unlikely that a lot of these mortgages would be paid off. And so we're looking at maybe 50 mortgages, maybe 6 different financial products, and just one bank. And at least for me, mentally thinking through this model as well as modeling this data in an actual database is very difficult. And if you think about this in relationship to the entirety of the U.S. mortgage market, it's very easy to see how we lost track of what the actual asset well below the financial product we were investing in is. It's such a complex thing, and there's so many different levels to it that it's not surprising, at least in retrospect, that we weren't sure of what we were actually investing in. And I think this also leads very much into the technical discussion of how difficult it actually is to keep track of these multi-layered tranches, these multi-layered investment tools in a relational store, wherein you're tying mortgagee to mortgages, CDO to CDO, mortgage to a CDO, and at scale it's just untenable. When operating on these highly connected data sets that are so incredibly large, traditional methods are just not only not optimal, but often non-functional at this level. And so, we just kind of closed our eyes and hoped for the best. I mean, we tried to do the due diligence we could, but we went as many steps as we could based on the tools we had. And I mean, remember, we're at the everything is going to be awesome forever phase of a business cycle. We didn't believe that there was ever going to be anything wrong with any of the assets we were investing in. And let's be honest, it wasn't awesome. Things went wrong. And so I think this leads to kind of the crux of this entire presentation. That is there a better way to model this data? Is there a better way to understand this data? And can we stop things like this from happening again? And I mean the answer is clearly yes, 1,000 times yes. There are better methods for interacting with this data. And the answer is things like graph databases. And the reason why is that when we discuss and work with these complex networks, graph databases store the data actually in that fashion, in terms of nodes and relationships, edges and vertices. Asking questions like, what are the underlying assets of this investment 5 steps away, 15 steps away. If you've ever worked with a relational store, or even working with a lot of other NoSQL stores, whether it's HDFS, whatever it may be, answering these questions in terms of many joins is incredibly difficult. A few steps out is tough. 10 steps out is really tough, and anything beyond that is literally impossible. Wherein working with a graph structure, this is the type of query that could have solved, or at least underpinned a lot of these issues. Literally match me a CDO product that is collateralized by a mortgage, and what that asterisk there means is find me any steps based on this relationship. So even if we're on CDO to the 15th, find me the asset at the very bottom of that tree. And find me the CDOs that are rated either not very very good or very good, A or AAA, and then just return me those with really low average credit scores. And I mean, I think it would be so interesting to be able to pull this data back and look at how many of these CDOs that were rated very favorably were actually tied to really poor underlying assets. And obviously, since that ship has sailed, we've quote unquote recovered by now. I think that the best next question to ask is, where else are these graphs in our world, and where else can we hopefully uncover, these implicit relationships, and uncover, the root cause of things. And so, I mean, obviously, maintaining the thread of investment vehicles and financial products. Looking at an asset graph, where a company may hold a position in a hedge fund, and of course that company wants to raise capital, so they issue bonds, and they also want to offer equity to the public, and so they issue stocks. And of course these hedge funds will own stocks, and maybe a hedge fund will also own an ETF, and an ETF may actually hold a position in this underlying company. And so, I mean, this may or may not be necessarily bad, but being able to uncover, a few steps out, is there insider trading going on here? How close are the boards of directors at this company to that hedge fund manager? Really unpacking these assets and all of these different structures really allows you to see a much more interesting picture versus, a company issues stocks and a company issues bonds. And I mean, some real world examples of this, I mean, look at Lehman Brothers. This is exactly what we're talking about today. Or, you can extend it to a few years later, looking at the Eurozone crisis. Was it really caused by countries like Greece and Portugal and Italy and Ireland, et cetera? Or, is there root cause analysis elsewhere in the global economy? Is it, manufacturing in China? Is it, consumption in the US? Being able to hang these structures together in an intelligible fashion and then operate on them is just something that I think is so interesting and so I mean, yeah, I think so incredibly useful. And then looking at Enron, another prime example of us getting too far away from the underlying asset, where Enron created what they called single purpose entities that would then hold failing assets of the Enron corporation. And so Enron was able to hide losses for months and months and months, years and years and years. And if we're able to unpack that in a graph, we can see I guess where the dog poo is. And then moving up the chain for financial institutions, if you're like at a prime brokerage and you're dealing with analysts, of course, being able to understand where they sit in the hierarchy, what sort of research they're doing, what sort of strategy implementation they're doing, what portion of this bank are they working with, or this hedge fund are they working with, and then of course geolocational information of Dallas has Texas, is in Central, etc. I mean, next let's look at the payments graph, a transactions graph, wherein we have a given business is doing business with many other small businesses, and we can look at, okay, what a customer value is, the relationship between the SMB here on the upper left, where they've done 11 transactions for 24K. Is that relationship more or less important than the one over here on the right, where they've done 200 transactions for 22K? And so I think really the most interesting extension of these transaction graphs and these payment graphs is money laundering or fraud detection, wherein you're able to trace the flow of assets between many different entities and really being able to see who's actually the beneficiary of this this cash flow or this business. I mean, the last one to talk about is, I guess, the most generally applicable is enterprise architecture systems. Whether you're looking at systems planning, impact analysis, how do these microservices come together to service a single application? Or talking more of the typical MDM thoughts of what are the most important nouns of my business, whether it's HR and saying, okay, VP manages who, this sales rep manages this territory which sells these products, or if it's product and network inventories of this service runs through this router which runs through this switch which is tied to this customer who has this SLA. If we're doing these upgrades or if we're doing these sorts of interventions, what are going to be the downstream effects? And so I mean, very briefly, what have we learned? Obviously that graph theory is unambiguously interesting, right? We've learned the causes of the subprime mortgage crisis. It really came down to these financial products being a daisy chain of CDOs tied to poor underlying assets, and I guess most importantly, what we've learned is that graph databases are the answer. They allow us to operate on highly connected data sets in a way that is impossible in any other structure. Thank you guys so much. Take care.